My name is Father John Beyer, and I want to offer a series of 3 videos about the topic of miscarriage, stillbirth, and early infant loss. In the show notes, I have linked various resources, both practical and spiritual, for couples who are suffering this tragedy. In these videos, I will offer mostly just spiritual reflections, but there are many practical questions that couples would have. So if you or someone you know is in a situation like this, please send them these resources. Let them know your solidarity and compassion. And let us together pray for these families and especially for their children. Let us hope in the goodness of God and in His power to save. I recently presided at a funeral mass for a child who was stillborn. It was a very powerful experience for me. It was the first time I had done that. And in accompanying the family that had asked me to celebrate that Mass, I became connected to many other couples who introduced me to a whole world of suffering and faith that I had just simply not experienced beforehand. I became convinced after talking to the parents, and in some cases also the siblings of the child who was lost, that these little souls are a profound witness to our faith, that they and their parents have a lot to teach us. In this video, I want to say something about that witness, that a child who is lost through early infant loss or stillbirth or miscarriage has a lot to say to us as an eloquent witness for the beautiful character of God's love. When people die after having lived a long life, sometimes we celebrate them. We don't simply mourn for them, although we should do that. We don't simply pray for the forgiveness of their sins, though we should do that. Sometimes, after a long life, we recognize that there is so much goodness that God has given us through the long course of that person's life. It's easy to be grateful. We share endearing stories about their lives. We even sometimes have a sense of relief that their suffering, perhaps after a long illness, has come to an end. This is very natural. It can be very difficult, however, to experience anything like that when a child is lost so young, in the womb or during birth or shortly after birth. There it becomes very difficult to understand what there is to celebrate when we lose someone we love and wanted to love for so many years. When death strikes so prematurely, the meaning of our lives seems to be threatened. The scandal of death really splits our hearts open, and we wonder, why are we here if we can be taken so soon? Why do we ever come into being if our time here can be so short and so seemingly without purpose? Our world teaches us that to be a person means to be active, dynamic, to have an effect upon the world, to be independent, and to do things for others. This is indeed a beautiful part of being a human being, to be active and dynamic. But if we only understand ourselves through our agency, through our power, through the things that we can accomplish, our understanding of the meaning of life can be very impoverished. And moments like death, and especially a premature death, radically call into question this understanding of the meaning of our lives. The truth is that our powers as human beings inevitably wane over the course of our life. Our years are not, in fact, a continuous ascent into greater and greater physical strength, greater and greater brilliance of mind and independence of body and spirit. Quite the contrary. The longer we live, the more dependent we become. The more in our old age we resemble the life of a very, very young child and a baby. This is the truth of what it means to be a human. More fundamentally, before we are active and dynamic and powerful, we're passive, we're dependent, we're loved. Our culture sadly teaches us in so many ways to disdain dependency. We want to be the actor, we want to be independent. We don't like so much to receive because that reveals our dependence. You see this most tragically in such things like abortion and euthanasia, where some of the weakest, the most dependent members of our society are cast off as if they didn't have anything to contribute by their witness. This sets a terrible bar for our understanding of our humanity, for our understanding of our dignity, what it means to be a human being. Abortion, euthanasia, and any other crime such as those suggests that to be a human being, to be worthy of life, to be tolerated, to live a meaningful life, somehow runs out once we begin to have such dramatic dependencies as those of a child in the womb or of an elderly person who could no longer feed or clothe themselves. Against such things stands the eloquent witness of little souls, those children who were lost to their loved ones by stillbirth, early infant loss, or miscarriage. These little ones manifest the truth of our dignity as human beings. Our dignity does not come from our ability to do great things with independence and physical or intellectual strength. Our dignity comes from simply having been created by God in His image. Before we're able to do anything on our own, we are always tied up in a network of relationships that make us into images of the Trinity. No matter what, every human being who comes into this world from the moment of conception is a pole in a network of relationships, is loved already by God the Creator, by the communion of saints, by the Church, and in small secret ways, even by the mother through her body. Before she's conceptually aware of her child, in some way physically, she's already nourishing her child, already in a relationship of love and nourishment. So many children before they're born are already in relationships with their mother, their father, their siblings, who eagerly await them, to welcome them into this world and to bring them to the font of baptism. These relationships show what it means to be a human being. To be a human being is to be made in the image of God, and as His image, to be tied together in bonds of love. These little souls teach us how God in fact loves us all. Before any of us is capable of responding to God with anything that would merit salvation, He loves us first. Before we're ever able to do any truly righteous deed, He loves us first by giving us His grace, allowing us to share in His own life. Before we could know Him as He is, before we could love Him as He deserves, He first knows and loves us. In other words, His attention to us underwrites all our agency. He is able to be in relation to us, able to bless us, nourish us, before we're ever able to know His name or do anything in response. We, in our response to God, are always secondary to His initiative, to the primacy of His grace, of His reaching out to us in love. In a similar way, a mother knows her child in the womb before the child is ever able to do anything in response, even to kick, to let the mother know that he or she is there. The mother is able to love the child, nourish the child, house the child. So much can be given over to establish a true relationship of love before the child is ever able, in any conscious way, to respond. So too are we in our relationship with God. Catholic faith, of course, recognizes how our moral or spiritual constitution is determined by our acts of intellect and will. Our agency is certainly important in life, especially when we think about a mature and complete response to God. However, Catholic faith also understands how much our intellect and will is shaped by realities that come before their exercise. How in so many ways we are given to ourselves through the conditions of our existence. Simply being created with the nature we have comes before any exercise of that nature. And being subject to all kinds of circumstances of providence shapes the way we can exercise our intellect and our will. And of course, the power of His grace, which operates in such secret ways behind and underneath and more deep in our intellect and will than we could ever sense. All these things shape our intellect and will. And thus, as Catholics, we believe in the power of intercessory prayer. We believe in indulgences. We believe in the whole economy of grace. And we believe in the gift of baptism for infants, all the ways in which we can spiritually be determined before we're ever capable of a mature exercise of our intellect and will. Thus, the Catechism says when speaking about baptism, baptism is the sacrament of faith, but faith needs the community of believers. It is only within the faith of the Church that each of the faithful can believe. The faith required for baptism is not a perfect and mature faith, but a beginning that is called to develop. The catechumen or the godparent is asked, "What do you ask of God's Church?" The response is faith. Baptism is a gift that is given within the community of the Church. The faith can come to us when baptism is petitioned even by a godparent, before we are even capable of a mature act of faith. We can be given the gift of baptism if those who present us to the Church desire it. The Church's celebration of baptism, even for infants, shows how deeply aware she is that no man is an island, but that we are all connected to each other physically and spiritually. Of course, the Church teaches that baptism as a sacrament is necessary for salvation. God has asked us to celebrate this sacrament. He charged his apostles at the Great Commission at the end of Matthew's Gospel to go and baptize. But as St. Thomas Aquinas said, God, though he has bound himself to his sacraments, is not bound by them. And so though he has charged us to celebrate the sacraments, and though he has bound his grace to them, promising unfailingly to bestow the life that he promises through the sacraments, that God nonetheless is not limited to that as the only means. It is the one he's revealed to us, it is the one he has charged us to celebrate, but he is the creator in ways known to him alone, can reach others. There is a quotation attributed to St. Bernard that is an extremely beautiful expression of our hope for children who were not baptized. I've not yet tracked down the citation for this quotation, but it is nonetheless such a beautiful expression that I offer it to you here. St. Bernard writes, "Your faith spoke for this child. Baptism for this child was only delayed by time. Your faith suffices. The waters of your womb, were they not the waters of life for this child? Look at your tears. Are they not like the waters of baptism? Do not fear this. God's ability to love is greater than our fears. Surrender everything to God." The Church recognizes a baptism of desire, and we have good reason to hope that just as the petition of the godparents at the sacrament of baptism is enough to grant the child the faith necessary for the validity of the rite, so too the desire of the family, the desire of the loved ones, waiting for this child to be born into the world, wanting at the opportune time to present the child for baptism, that God might work through this desire to give the gift of saving faith to the child. And thus, as the Catechism says explicitly with regard to children who have died without baptism, as regards children who have died without baptism, the Church can only entrust them to the mercy of God, as she does in her funeral rites for them. Indeed, the great mercy of God, who desires that all men should be saved, and Jesus' tenderness toward children, which caused him to say, "Let the children come to me, do not hinder them," allow us to hope that there is a way of salvation for children who have died without baptism. All the more urgent is the Church's call not to prevent little children coming to Christ through the gift of holy baptism. Jesus promises that in his Father's house are many dwelling places. It is very reasonable to hope that there are special places for these little souls who died so prematurely that they were not able to receive the gift of the sacrament of baptism, who are so dependent upon the circumstances of the Creator God and the limitations of frail human beings. It is very reasonable to believe that these little souls, such extreme examples of the dependency that ultimately marks all human beings, are given special dwelling places in the kingdom of God. Because the smaller we are, the more dependent we are, the more we have to rely upon the goodness of God, the more we draw down his fatherly attention and care. The magnificent gospel that we as Christians preach is not simply that we human beings ought to strive for God. Many religions and philosophies teach something similar, that human beings ought to search always for the ultimate source of all truth, goodness, and beauty. The great message of Christianity goes beyond this, however, and says that beneath all our striving for God is His striving for us. That our efforts, our dynamic motions, our powers are all made possible by His prior love. The little souls who die prematurely witness so eloquently to the truth of the Christian message. They are loved even before they're able to do anything with their own minds and hearts. They show that what it means to be a human being is not simply to be capable of great deeds. They show that what it means to be a human being is first and foremost to be loved into this world. And the parents who love them into this world image the God who loves us all into this world. And the parents who love their children before their child is ever capable of giving a response have some insight into the way in which God loves us all and is so powerful to save, despite every weakness we might have.